Welcome, Rose, Catherine, Mwatu, Lee, and Robert Kimani to this brief tip session on the International Speech Contest. And the international speech is meant to be about 5 to 7 minutes. It's the only speech that advances beyond the district, where you start at the club, go to the area, then the division, district. Then from the district, you go to the regionals, and then at some point you get to the finals during the international annual convention. And so to understand what it would take for you to deliver an effective speech, an effective winning speech, it is important to know the judging criteria for the international speech. And the judging criteria is like I have just displayed there. The majority of the points, 50% of the points, go to speech development, the content itself. And so this includes speech development, effectiveness, and speech value. Then 30% goes into the delivery, the way you actually present your speech, and 20% goes into the language that you use in your speech. And so having the content done very well from the very beginning will give you a great foundation for your speech. And from there, from my personal experience, a well-written speech is a speech that is easy to deliver. And a well-written speech is a speech where the language comes through very well. And so for our tip session this evening, I'm going to focus on how to get the content as perfect as possible. And then as you practice, the different mentors in our club are going to help you get the next 30%. And so this evening, we're just going to focus on how to get that perfect content. But before we go into the content, let's just understand what the content of the international speech needs to be like. So 20% of the content goes to speech development. And this is how you put the ideas together. And you need to put them in such a way that the audience can easily follow and understand them. And so your speech needs to have a clear purpose. And that purpose needs to be demonstrated and served through the structure of the speech, the opening, body, and the conclusion. And then your speech needs to engage the audience from the very beginning and keep that the attention of the audience all the way to the end of the speech. And finally, your speech needs to include relevant supporting material that is going to add value to the speech and add interest to the speech. And all of this needs to be done in such a smooth way where you go from the introduction, you smoothly move to the body and smoothly move to the conclusion, all the time keeping the attention of the audience and having in their minds, they need to be clear what is going on. And so that is 20%. The 15% of the content is how effective it is. And so the judge is going to make a subjective judgment on how effective the structure of your speech and your whole speech and the way you deliver it meets the purpose that you set out to achieve. And so some of the questions that they're going to ask themselves are, was I able to determine the speaker's purpose? Did the speech relate directly to that purpose? Was the audience interest held by the speaker? Was this speech subject appropriate for this particular audience? And then the next 15% is going to go into speech value. For your speech to be a winning speech, it needs to tackle an important topic, something that by the end of your speech, the audience needs to feel like they have learned something, like you have contributed in one way or another to their thinking and to their lives. And so the ideas that you present to your speech need to be very important. And just to use an example of an important subject, the person who won the video speech contest, she came from East Africa, and her speech was basically about how when people underestimate you, when people use language that pulls you down, they say that you cannot do something, and then you become determined and set out to prove them wrong. And so that is something that everybody can relate to, and it is a subject that is important enough to almost everybody, and it gives them value after listening to your speech, after listening to the story of how you overcame such negative perceptions of your abilities. They live by the time they're done listening to your speech, they feel like they have gained something from you. And so it is important, when you're selecting the topic of your speech, it needs to be something that is valuable, something that is going to add value to their lives. And this does not mean that it should not be humorous. You can integrate humor into your speech. However, there needs to be value that is delivered despite any humor that you might have in your speech. And so when we think about the content, the very first place to start is, of course, the purpose of the speech, as we've read from the judging criteria. And so you have the general purpose, which is the broad goal of your speech. And after you've settled on the topic, you need to be very clear to yourself, what are you setting out to do? Do you want to inform? Do you want to entertain? Do you want to persuade the audience? And the importance of doing this from the very basic step of determining the general purpose is because you need to start building a very strong foundation for your speech. Your speech needs to be very tight. It needs to be very coherent. And so you need to start from the very basics when you are writing your international speech. And just to mention, any of these tips are going to work towards helping you write any project speech. They're going to help make it easy for you to achieve the purposes of a project whenever you are delivering a speech. And so it is applicable in that in that perspective. And so the first step is be absolutely clear what is the general purpose that you're setting out to do. Then once you've thought of the general purpose, go to the specific purpose. At the end of your speech, what do you want the audience to take away, to do, to learn, or to know? And so it needs to be an infinitive phrase that starts with to something, to inform the audience on how to perform CPR or something like that. And then once you've thought of the specific purpose, you need to have a central idea that in one sentence sums up sums up the major ideas of your speech. I'm going to present an example shortly. While you're doing all of this, you need to be clear on who your audience is. You need to understand the people that you're going to speak to be talking to, and so you need to have a purpose and a central idea that they can relate to, that they can find important. And so when you're talking at the club, you need to speak to the members of SEMA. When you go to the area, you need to think about the people that you're likely to encounter at the area contents, and modify your speech to suit that particular audience. Something I wanted us to do along the way, but I'm not sure whether it is feasible, is to hear from the contestants. We don't want to give away your speeches, but if you need any help in narrowing down from the general purpose to the specific purpose and coming up with a central idea, please feel free to to let me know if you would like us to go through that process with you in developing your speech. And so here are some examples. Let's say your topic is music therapy, and you decide that the general purpose is to inform. The specific purpose could be to inform my audience about the benefits of music therapy for people with psychological or cognitive disabilities. And then the central idea is music therapy developed as a formal mode of treatment during the 20th century, utilizes a number of methods and is explained by several theories that account for its success. At this point, it is important to have all of this information written down so that you do it in a systematic way. As we saw in the description of the judging criteria, your speech needs to fit together and it needs to flow smoothly. And so you need to start thinking about this and writing these things down. The next example is a topic like Dia de los Muertos. The general purpose could be to inform, and the specific purpose is to inform the audience about the history of Mexico's Dia de los Muertos. And the central idea is Dia de los Muertos can be traced to the Aztecs, was moved from summer to fall by Spanish priests, and today is celebrated in a number of ways in different regions of Mexico. Do you have any questions from the audience, the contestants, or anybody else? Very good. Let us move on. And so some things that you need to think about when dealing with a specific purpose statement of your speech is because it needs to be a full infinitive phrase, not a fragment. You need to write it out in full, from to inform, to persuade, to something, something, all the way a complete sentence. Do not do a fragment. Next, it needs to be a statement and not a question. Avoid figurative languages in your purpose statement, things like it needs, the purpose of this is to avoid generalities so that as much as possible, it is absolutely clear to you and to anybody else who is reading that statement what you're seeking to achieve. And then limit your purpose statement to one thing alone. It shouldn't be to inform people the benefits of CPR and to inform them of the ways to perform it. You need to choose one direction to go, because you do not have enough time to go two directions. And when you're trying to do too many things in your speech, the judges and the audience become confused and they do not know what you're trying to do. And so the safest way is to choose a single distinct idea that you're going to focus on. And finally, make sure that it is not vague, it is not general, it is as specific as possible. It is something that at the end of your speech, you can measure whether you were able to achieve it. You can ask a single question to the audience, and by them raising their hand, you can tell whether you are able to achieve that purpose or not. And so after you've done thinking about the general, specific, and the central ideas, then you can start thinking about the actual content of your speech. And the first thing that you're going to go through is the opening. As we read in the judging criteria, you need to capture the audience, the attention of the audience from the very beginning, and then maintain it throughout your speech. And so the way you start your speech needs to have an impact. And the things to remember about this is you need to relate the topic to the audience from the very beginning. You need to show them that it is important to them. And you need to give them a reason to continue listening to you. Next, you could choose to startle the audience that is a very, it's a technique that I think that has worked for me. For example, during the last speech that I delivered, starting the speech by talking about what could be the reason for your divorce, that is something that is unexpected, and it immediately focuses the audience's attention on you. And so the first sentences, the first phrases that you're going to utter need to jolt the audience and have them focus on you. You can arouse the curiosity of the audience by talking about using a series of statements or a series of questions. Another way is to begin with a quote. However, this needs to be done in a very specific way. Your delivery will determine whether it seems like you're an amateur, or it's like, or you deliver it like someone who has become a professional speaker. And so when thinking about starting with a quote, think a lot about how you're going to deliver it, and also think of a quote that is not so common that the audience won't really care about it. Another way is to tell a story. And for this, I will use the example of the speech that Joyce Osodo delivered in our last speech. She told a story of how she was called by her boss and taken to a boardroom. And when they got to the boardroom, she was the one who was supposed to present what she thought, the slides that she thought she was just going to be flipping through for on behalf of the boss. She was the one who was supposed to actually present them. And so starting with a story like that gets the attention of the audience is a great way to start. And also consider using visual aids to support your attention getting introduction. And once you're done with that part of capturing the attention of the audience, you're in a position now to move on to reveal the topic of your speech. This seems like a minor thing, but we often forget to say what exactly we are going to be talking about in our speech. And your goal when you are writing your speech and when you're presenting is to make it as easy as possible for the judges. The judges don't need to have, you shouldn't make it so difficult for the judges that they have to sift through your speech to find out your purpose and what you're trying to achieve. Make it a point to reveal exactly what your speech is going to be about. If possible, have that purpose statement in there and the central idea, so that your goal is to make it as easy as possible for the audience and for the judges. Another thing that you need to do in your introduction is to establish your credibility and goodwill with the audience. You need to demonstrate in a way why you are the right person to be talking about that specific subject. Is it something that you have gone through personally? Is it something that you have had experience dealing with? Is it something that you have conducted extensive research on? And while when you're establishing your credibility, in case there are aspects of the topic that some audience might find offensive, you need to soften it for them. You need to make it easier for them to swallow. If for example, you're talking about gender roles in a relationship, there are quite extreme views that people might hold. And so when you're dealing with such a thing, you need to make it easier for the people who might oppose your central idea to listen to you until you have convinced them of your thinking. And so credibility and goodwill. And finally, you need to preview the body of your speech. The importance of doing this is because the judges and the audience are going to be looking for about 3 points in your speech. They're going to be looking for certain things in the body of your speech. You need to make it explicit to them what you're going to be talking about, so that by the time you're talking about it, they are already expecting. And so that is what you need to use when constructing the opening of your speech. You need to have an attention getter. You need to reveal the topic of your speech. You need to establish your credibility and goodwill. And finally, you need to give a preview of your speech. And we could go through a simple example. And in this speech, the speaker is talking about space junk. And the way she starts the topic is by first relating the topic to the audience and then arousing their curiosity. And so she starts off by saying, tonight, after the sun goes down, I'd like you to step out, lift your eyes to the heavens and gaze to the night sky. I feel like that introduction is intriguing. What do you want us to be to look out for in the night skies? Why would you want us to do something like this? And then she continues to say, if it's clear, you'll be able to see the moon, the stars, and distant planets. Yet right outside our atmosphere is something not beautiful, something that Scientific America calls a minefield in the Earth's orbit. And so I find that this is the kind of opening that captures your attention, that captures the attention of the audience, and gets their ears to stand up and be prepared to listen to the rest of your speech. The speaker then goes on to exactly reveal what she's going to talk about, does a definition of what she's going to talk about, and then she explains why this particular topic that she is tackling is important and why she's credible to do it. And then she finally concludes the introduction by giving a preview of the main points that she's going to cover in her body. And so in such a short amount of time, you can accomplish a lot. And all of these things are going to build towards helping you get those speech development points that make up the majority of the points of the international speech. And so we are done with the introduction, and then we are going to move on to the body. Do we have any questions regarding the introduction of the speech? Or maybe I should ask, what are some of the most effective speech openings that you have had in the last couple of Toastmasters meetings that you've attended? What are some of the effective openings that you have encountered? Anybody? Robert Kimani? Lee, do you have any speeches that have stood out for you?
I think for me, it is asking a question. That normally works for me.
Right.
Especially relating to the subject that you intend to, sort of just rephrasing an experience as a question. Yeah. So I find that a bit very powerful in terms of drawing attention.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then visual aids can also work. Yes, especially if it's to do with a technical presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Those are great ways to start a speech. Asking a question to get the audience to think about an experience that they might have gone through or a hypothetical experience that they might go through. That definitely usually draws the attention of the audience.
The other
And
thing is normally to use to use the word imagine, as in to take people to the time, place, and setting of your story.
Right. So it needs to be done in a very vivid way, as vivid
Yes,
as
yes.
possible. You need to use words that paint a picture for them and brings that experience to life.
Yeah.
Definitely. And
Uh,
once,
but just to be clear,
mm,
this opening,
mm.
is it explicitly captured as an item that has some distinct marks allocated to it?
Yes, the speech
Probably you
development.
can display the judging criteria first, so that in that sheet. Okay.
To go back to the judging criteria, the speech opening account is accounted for in the speech development 20%.
Okay.
Your speech needs to have a clear opening, body, and conclusion. It needs to have clear transitions. It needs to have a purpose, and so all of that goes into that 20%. However,
Okay.
it all helps in helping your speech in the effectiveness part and also in the demonstrating of the speech value. Because if your purpose is not clear, then your speech is not well organized and not easy to follow, then you're not going to have any speech value. And so that opening, body, and conclusion part is captured in the content. And because it accounts for such a huge percentage, 50%, half of the marks are going to come from just the content of your speech. That is why we have chosen to focus on that this evening, because once you have that sorted out, the delivery and the language are much easier to implement. But once your speech has no clear purpose, has no structure, then your delivery and anything else that you do in your speech is going to fall flat. And so we move on to the body of your speech. And continuing with that idea that has been expressed in the judging criteria, that your speech needs to smoothly move from introduction all the way to the conclusion, you need to think about how you're going to organize the points in your speech. You need to have a way that makes sense to the audience. You cannot just put together 3 points and then speak on them in a random way and expect to be able to achieve this purpose. And so you need to be very clear whether which of these orderings is going to work best for your speech. Is a chronological order going to work best? Is talking about different places going to work for you? Is using the structure of a cause and effect going to work better? Problem, solution, or topical order? A topical order is where you take your speech and then divide it into subtopics that make sense and relate to each other. And so when you're dealing with the body of your speech, you need to make sure that each of the main points is distinct. It needs to be independent. You need to avoid having 2 points that are too similar to each other, such that as you're presenting your speech, it is possible for the judges to think that they are just one huge point and they end up getting lost. And so when you're thinking about separating the body into different points, you need to have points that are absolutely distinct from each other. And then you need to use the same pattern of wording for the main point. For example, Still using the example of the speech I delivered during our last meeting, I will start the speech by saying the initiating communicator might perceive me as standoffish. The analytical communicator might perceive me as, do I remember? As a bully. And finally, the supportive communicator might perceive me as insensitive. And so when you're introducing the main point, you need to use that the pattern of wording, a similar pattern of wording for all the 3 points. And again, the reason for that is to make it clear to the judges what you're doing and that these are distinct points from each other and to help them follow you. And finally, when you're separating your speech into points, make sure that the main points are, the body is divided into about 3 equal sections. You don't want the first main point to take like 50% of your body, then the second takes about 30%, and then the third takes about 20%. It feels loop-sided, and also as the judges and the audience is listening to your speech, they are going to get lost and they are not going to get that sense of that these are 3 points that make up your speech. And so having them devoting an equal amount of time to each of the main points is going to help make this clear to the judge and in the mind of the judge and the audience in general. We'll get back to a certain aspect of the main points towards the end of the presentation, and that particular thing is the supporting ideas to make these points interesting. For now, we will move on to the closing. And when you are closing your speech, you need to make it clear to the audience that you are just about to end the speech. As I conclude, in closing, or words that are in a similar vein, you need to make it clear to the audience that you're now coming into the conclusion. And second, you need to reinforce the audience's understanding of your central idea and your purpose. And so you need to summarize your speech. You could end your speech with a quotation. And if instead of a quotation, you could also choose to use a dramatic statement. A dramatic statement is where you develop a phrase for yourself that clearly exhibits your central idea. For example, a dramatic statement could be, to avoid financial disagreement, you therefore need to have a fully kitted communication tool box. That is not super dramatic, but I think it, in a way, helps us understand what a dramatic statement is meant to be. That final statement that gives that final push of your purpose and reminds the audience as you're just about to sit down what exactly you have been talking about. Another very powerful way of concluding is referring to the introduction. If you had a story in your introduction, you could choose to refer to that story one more time just before you close. I found that to be a very powerful way of closing a loop in the minds of the audience. So before you move on to ending with a quote or making a dramatic statement, first of all, think about whether it is possible for you to reference the introduction. That will be a killer conclusion to your speech. And so we have here a sample conclusion again, where you signal that you are just about to wrap up by saying in conclusion, and then you do a summary of what you have covered in your speech, and then in this speech, the author references what she had said, what she had instructed the audience to do. gazing up to the night skies. So she says, so the next time you are outside at night, lift your gaze upwards. You'll see the moon, the stars, and perhaps a couple of planets. But now you'll know there's a lot more up there than meets the eye. And I think that is a perfect, if there was a perfect conclusion to your speech, it will be one that refers back to the introduction. And so we've talked about the opening of your speech, the body, and the conclusion, and the main points that are going to make up your body. And so to create that sense of moving smoothly from the introduction all the way to the conclusion, you need to have connective statements throughout. You need to have transition statements. After you're done with one main point and before you move to the next main point, you need to have a transitional statement, that both talks about the point that you've just covered and also gives a brief preview of the next point that you're going to cover. For example, now that we have a clear understanding of the problem, let me share the solution. This is where you have a problem solution types of structure. I have spoken so far of Cesar Chavez, the community organizer, but it was his work as a labor leader that truly etches his name into American history. In this situation is where you have sort of a chronological structure. Keeping these points in mind about sign language, let's return to the sentence. That is another way of transitioning from one point to another. These are usually neglected in our speeches, but however, they serve a very important purpose of keeping the attention of the audience and making it clear to them what is going on in your speech. And so to ensure that you capture those, a majority of those 50 points that make up the speech development, you need to think about clear transitions between your statements. And then another type of connective statements are the sign posting. The first cause, the second cause, the final cause. Again, these feel like mundane things that you might have in your, they might feel like mundane things and they might escape your attention. However, they greatly improve, they make it so much more easier for the judges and the audience to follow your speech. And remember, your goal is to make sure that the judges understand the purpose of your speech and make it clear to them that the body, the opening, the body, and the conclusion of your speech address that purpose, and they address it in as smooth a way as possible. A question from Gaviga is, on closing, does a recap help or does it water down your strong conclusion? A recap is absolutely necessary when doing your when delivering your conclusion. After you've signaled that you're about to conclude, it is important for you to restate the purpose and the central idea of your speech, and also do a very quick recap of the main points. It does not water, it in fact reinforces this idea. However, you don't leave it at a recap. You need to go further and have a something I will call closing with impact, where you have a quote or that dramatic statement, or you again reference the attention getting device that you had in your introduction. And so having a recap is a very important thing to have in your conclusion. Are there any other questions? Great. And so, as I said, I would refer back to the body. When you have you have the main points that make up the body of your speech. As I said, you introduce them with a sentence that says something like, the first item you're going to tackle is this, and then you have the main statement that introduces the main point. However, you need to have a variety of supporting materials for each of your main points. You don't want to be monotonous where all you're doing is explaining. You do not want a situation where all you're doing is giving statistics. You do not want a situation where all you're doing is giving definitions. You need to have a wide variety of supporting material for each of the main points. And some of the supporting materials are, you could choose to use a story for one of the main points. Then and this is a very short narrative that explains that particular point. And the different supporting materials have advantages and disadvantages, strengths and weaknesses. And one of the strengths of the narrative is to dramatize your topic. However, something that can happen with a narrative, especially when it is a humorous one, it can briefly take the attention of the audience away from your speech. And so you need to make sure that if you're going to use a narrative, it is as relevant as possible to your central idea, to the purpose of your speech. Then you could use examples or definitions, testimonials, facts, and statistics. The goal when you're writing a speech is to have a variety of them so that it keeps the audience interested in your speech. And when you're selecting the right type of supporting material for each of your points, you need to think about whether it is going to keep your audience engaged, whether it's going to keep the attention of the audience. And so when you're writing a speech, you start off with the introduction, the opening where you have an attention-getting device. Then you introduce your topic, then you demonstrate your credibility and create goodwill with the audience. Then you preview your speech. You have a transitional statement that smoothly moves from the introduction to the body. In the body, you have the main points and they need to follow a similar pattern, each of them, the way you're going to introduce them. They need to be joined together with transitional statements, and each of the main points need supporting material. When you're looking for supporting material, ensure that you have a variety of them, different ones for the 3 points, and also ensure that they are relevant to your speech and they help you get closer to the purpose of your speech. And they are also interesting to the target, the audience that you're going to be speaking to. You're then going, after you're done with the body, you're going to signal that you're coming to your conclusion. In the conclusion, you're going to do a recap or a summary of what you've spoken about, then close with impact with a quote, with a dramatic statement, or by referencing the introduction, the opening that you used. And believe me, from my personal experience, I have last night I was calculating the number of speeches, and I can't get an exact number, but I think I'm past the 50 speeches marks, the 50 speeches mark at Toastmasters. These are mainly pathways speeches. And the fact is, of all the speeches that I have delivered, it is always, I find it very easy for me to achieve the purpose of the project. And the reason for this is what I've been talking about this evening. Having that well-structured introduction, having a well-structured body, and having a well-structured conclusion. With this, it is absolutely clear to the audience and to the evaluator and to the judge what exactly you are doing in your speech, what exactly you are trying to achieve. And furthermore, it makes the process of holding the attention of the audience so much, it becomes easier for you to hold the attention of the audience. And also, once you become comfortable with this structure of a speech, it becomes easier for you to add humor and to add things that are specific to you. And once you have a speech that is so well structured, the process of practicing it, and the process of actually delivering it becomes extremely easier. And finally, an important advantage of having such a well-structured speech is that you can memorize it in less than an hour, because you understand those different segments, you're clear on those different segments, you're clear on your purpose, you're clear on what you're trying to achieve in the introduction, what you're trying to achieve in the body, and what you're trying to achieve in the conclusion. So it makes it so much easier for you to retain, it makes it easy for you to present, and it makes it easy for the audience and the judges to follow. All of these contribute towards you earning marks in the different segments of the judging criteria. However, as we conclude, please remember that the majority of the marks go into speech development. And so that is the area that before you even start practicing your speech, you need to nail down. And once you've nailed down that part, I can assure you, you're going to have an exemplar speech. With that, yes, Lee, I think I should have had a party when I closed, I crossed that golden jubilee mark. And with that comes to the, I conclude my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Karanja. Lee seems to be having a question. Lee, go ahead.
Just clarify, on the physical bit, the physical part of the judging criteria, how does that relate to an online, a virtual platform?
A virtual platform.
Yes, the physical, I guess it normally means the physical stage, the movement within the stage.
Yeah. In the virtual platform is, I think what is important is for you to give yourself an advantage. And the way you give yourself an advantage is because according to the rules of the online contest, you are the one who supplies the equipment that you're meant to use for your delivery. It's not the club or it's not the district. And so with that freedom, you can go out of your way to create a setup that looks great. You can take the time to find a place where the background is as clear as possible, and you have enough room where you can place the camera far enough from you so that you can appear from your waist upwards, and also there is enough room for your hands for you to demonstrate your gestures. And so when you're thinking about the physical aspect, the second part about delivery and the physical aspect is trying to look for a setup that gives you an advantage. For me, I use a webcam that is not attached to my laptop, and so what the webcam does for me is that it helps me. I can position it on a tripod away from a good distance away from me and frame myself very well. And so that could be an avenue that you take while preparing for your international speech. Find look for a webcam that has a long enough cable, and that you can place in a position that makes you clear to the audience. And if you're in a position to get one with a higher resolution, the better. You will look very good in it, and everything that you do, your gestures and your movement, your facial expression is going to be clear to the judges. And then also think about what you're going to do with the lights. That you do not need an expensive light setup. Desk lamps, for quite a long time I used desk lamps, and which are relatively cheap. You can access them relatively cheaply, and they're going to enhance your appearance on the screen. And so, yeah, get yourself a setup, and start looking for the right position that is going to make you look good, and also is going to give you the freedom for movement and expression. Off topic, on visual aids, how did you get your image inside the presentation slides? When you go to screen share, there is an advanced tab, and under the advanced tab, there is the option of using a PowerPoint presentation as a virtual background. And so, yeah, that is something that I've been experimenting with, using a PowerPoint as a virtual background, and then you just go through the slides. Great. I hope my presentation has helped you. If you haven't written your speech, get started on writing it. And also, if you've written it already, find ways of revising your speech and making it better. If there are no further questions, I will hand back to Robert Kimani.
Thank you very much, Karanja, for that wonderful presentation and for all the nuggets and insights you have brought into the presentation. I'd like to recognize the presence of our contestants, Lee Kanyago and Mwatu Musili. Thank you very much for coming through. Our Vice President Educational Subcommittee team, Radhihia and Rose Kianduma, thank you very much. And there were 2 new members who were in this training before. Thank you so much for availing yourselves to come and listen and learn. Karanja, again, thank you very much for agreeing to take on this coaching assignment. With your permission, I hope we will be able to share this information on our YouTube channel so that the rest of the club can benefit now moving forward. With that,